from a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to hand feed backyard birds without getting your eyes pecked out.
Oh, dear.
And now, the podcast host who has no food for birds because that's what worms are for, Pete Dominic!
That's right. Thank you, Pete Co. Funny you should say that. I was just visiting Ma and Pa outside Syracuse, New York, and upstate Central New York. I was reprimanded for calling it upstate. It's Central New York is where I'm from, and my mom's bird feeders were kicking ass. All kinds of birds, all morning, all day. So enjoyable to watch out the kitchen sink window, the window there over the... Oh, just a wonderful thing. And I realized I haven't filled up my bird feeders outside the shed studio here in ages, so inspired to do so. They can eat worms too. Oh, and speaking of worms, well, caterpillars. Val told me that there were caterpillars eating the parsley I'm growing on the deck, so I went out and grabbed each one of them. There's like 5 of them, and chucked them out in the lawn, one of which hit a post and just blew apart, and felt kind of bad about that. But I didn't want them to eat my parsley. I came in and she said, "What, you got rid of them? They were going to turn into beautiful butterflies." And I wasn't sure about that. Looked it up, and she is right. I just got rid of a whole bunch of little caterpillars, and almost all caterpillars turn into butterflies or moths. Did you know that? I guess I didn't know they all did, but black swallowtail caterpillars were eating my parsley, and apparently she liked them. Felt pretty bad about that, but I'm glad we all learned something together, which is what the show is about each and every day. Joining me today, a very interesting woman who's a progressive prosecutor in Virginia, Loudoun County. Her name is Buta Biberaj, and we had a great conversation about what her job is and how she got there. She comes highly recommended from my friend, our friend, Qasim Rashid, and you're going to love that conversation. I learned a lot from her. And before that, I've got Michael Cohen, formerly columnist from the Boston Globe, now writing his own newsletter on Substack, Truth and Consequences. We always love his analysis. He was on last week. JL Cohen pinged me. I've got to get him back on. JL, come on the show this week. What are you doing? And he's like, I always love Michael Cohen. I thought he was dead on. Yeah, we had a great wide-ranging conversation about what has gone through politics in Congress over the last couple of weeks, and I think you're going to like that as well. Yeah, I know you are. Always great. Excellent guests joining me all this week. Who do you want me to talk to? Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And all this week, sponsored by Indeed.com. I'll tell you more about them after my conversation with Michael Cohen. What a weekend in news. Just want to mention, of course, the economy adding significantly more jobs in July than expected. Apparently, over 500,000 jobs were added last month. Economists were predicting around 250,000. They always get those numbers way off, the predictions, that is. The unemployment rate declines to 3.5%, the same level as in February 2020, before the pandemic began to shut down the economy. How about that? Here we are, August 2022, and we are back to the same levels of employment as we were right before the pandemic. Did anybody really predict that? The airlines sure didn't, huh? Nightmare after nightmare. I do not want to get on a plane to go anywhere. I just hear so much bad stuff. Anyway, job growth, widespread gains in leisure and hospitality, professional business services, and healthcare. Are you in a job that you're happy with? Have you looked? Have you quit? Are you looking? I'd love to hear from folks who are in that situation. Always want to hear from you. Also, the Indiana governor signed an abortion ban. Eric Holcomb is his name. Of course, Republican, signed it into law on Friday. And major employers in Indiana are slamming the new abortion law right away. 2 large corporations based there, pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly and engine manufacturer Cummins, criticizing the state's restrictive new abortion law over the weekend. In a statement, Eli Lilly said the company will be, quote, forced to plan for more employment growth outside of Indiana, unquote. Wow, how about it? And a spokesperson for the other company, Cummins, which is not the most fortunate name, Cummins, stated that restrictions on abortion would impede the company's ability to attract and retain top talent. we're going to have to come in something else, somewhere else. Ooh, that was terrible. Sorry. Each company employs around 10,000 people in the Hoosier state. So the new abortion ban is really not something that big companies want to see, or small companies. It's just wild. Bans all abortions except in cases of rape, incest, lethal fetal abnormality, or serious health risk to the mother, apparently. They had the Conservative Political Action Conference over the weekend. You know, one of these crazy, it just gets crazier and crazy. They invited a dictator, an authoritarian dictator, Orban from Hungary, to speak there. They had the dude in the jail on display, an insurrectionist who actually got probation and didn't ever go to jail. And it was just a weird performance art piece. And can you imagine if that was an Al-Qaeda member? And then Trump apparently spoke for like 15 hours outlining his agenda, which is preposterous, and I don't know what headlines came out of that, but he also won the straw poll there, I think, meaning he is still the favorite amongst the hardcore Texas Republicans, whoever goes to CPAC. I don't know. The question that continues to be asked and answered is, how much influence does Donald Trump still have? And does it matter? And I think that's an important question to answer in a million different ways. Oh, and Alex Jones is going to have to pay $45.2 million in punitive damages, apparently. A Texas jury, speaking of Texas, Friday decided that conspiracy theorist Alex Jones must pay $45.2 million in punitive damages in a lawsuit brought by the parents of a child killed in the 2012 Sandy Hook school massacre. So a lot of analysis on what his impact will continue to be. If he's going to continue to do the show, I think nobody is questioning that. He's going to have to now. And will he actually have to pay these penalties? I'm kind of obsessed with that. I'm also obsessed with the fact that somebody said that legendary comedian Bill Hicks, who died, I think, in the early 90s, actually never died, and it's Alex Jones. Because they do look pretty similar. But that's not true, but it's still funny. And finally, Kim Kardashian and Pete Davidson broke up after 9 months together. And the reason I mention is that because if I have to know, you have to know. And I don't want to know, and I don't care, but I have a 14-year-old who looks at TikTok and watches and thinks about some of this shit, even though we criticize it. And she said to me at dinner the other night, "Dad, did you hear about Pete and Kim?" And I knew what she was talking about, and I felt bad, but I felt a little guilty that I even knew that, but I was happy that I got to engage her. So I was like, yeah, too bad. It's pretty disappointing. All right, well, just wanted to mention a few news stories here at the top of the show over the weekend, and now I want to get to my first guest. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. If you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, please do so now. StandUpWithPete.com. And while you're at it, you can sign up for a paid subscription for my friend Michael Cohen's Substack newsletter. That's what he's doing with his work right now. Truth and Consequences. truthandcons.substack.com. Michael, of course, former Boston Globe columnist, author, speaker, and one of my favorite political analysts. And you should go subscribe to his Substack right now and follow him on Twitter if you haven't already. Speechboy71. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Cohen coming up. Buta Biberaj. Great show for you on this Monday. I hope you're doing good. Let's do it, Michael. I have connected with Michael Cohen, who joins me now. He's been all over it on the Twitter and on the Substack, writing about everything that's happening, even on vacation. Thank you. I really wanted to get your take on things, so I'm glad that you worked through your vacation, and thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Pete. You know that.
Thank you for not turning off the news while you were in the Cape.
You know what? I can't do it. Unfortunately, I'm a news junkie, and I just can't stay away.
Well,
there's a lot going on too, you know?
A lot going on. We talked about this, I don't know if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, but this has been quite a month and a couple of weeks with the job numbers coming in. And then I see polling where Democrats, at least in one poll, are actually running head to head with Republicans in races they weren't before. And it seems like I just wanted to get your take on the last week of news. The president's got COVID. He's killing terrorists, creating jobs, gas prices going down, huge legislation nobody predicted passing. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I would say, it's funny because I was thinking about this earlier, like the response to a lot of this is to say that Joe Biden's had a great month, which he has politically, but I think the country has had a great month, and particularly with what happened today with the passage of I think it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's really kind of the modified Build Back Better plan. $360 or $370 billion in climate spending. I mean, this is a huge, huge deal that is going to make the U.S., the leading green economy in the world, and is going to really, jumpstart the efforts to decarbonize our country, our economy. So it's a huge deal. And so, I understand the motivation. I mean, I write about politics for a living. I understand the motivation to make it about Biden, but this is really just a great moment for America, and really, gives us some fleeting hope that somehow we can avoid the worst ravages of climate change.
Well, fair enough. Great reframing of my question and making it not about politics and about the president and his or Democrats' hopes in the midterms, but more about the benefits. Not to mention, I'm really interested in talking with some environmentalists, some climate policy types of folks about how they see this. But the other part of this is there's some really good stuff, healthcare, the Medicaid subsidies continuing. I mean, I think what you're saying is there's policies in here that are actually going to make a difference to people's lives today with the cost of drugs.
Absolutely. You're not going to see increases in Obamacare premiums. You're going to see, subsidies are going to keep check with basic increases in premiums, which is good. So people aren't paying more for healthcare. Huge breaks for people on Medicaid as far as drug pricing. Unfortunately, because the Republican Party is controlled by people who are monsters, we're unable to get a cap on how much people have to spend for insulin, which, today that was a big issue. But Republicans had their one big victory, which is they stopped a Democratic amendment that would have capped how much people would pay for insulin for $35.
Republicans strip $35 insulin price cap from Democrats' bill, but insist its Senate rules are to blame, not that they're against the policy itself.
No, of course, that's a load of shit. Because there was an amendment to vote to include it in the legislation, and it failed 57 to 43, which, of course, that's how democracy works. If you get 57 votes for something in the Senate, that's not good enough for it to become law. It has to be 60. Right. So 7 Republicans did vote for this. 43 did not, which, again, is just, it's monstrous. I mean, I don't understand what possible rationale or how someone could live with themselves knowing that they're basically making it possible for drug companies to gouge customers on insulin pricing. But that's where we are in the country. But, I don't dwell on the negative. There's a lot of positive in this bill. And certainly on when it comes to Medicare and Medicaid, there will be caps on insulin, how much people can spend out of pocket on insulin will have to spend, which is a good thing.
Yes, that's really important point.
That does not apply to private insurance, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to know if it was the insulin makers, pharmaceutical companies that were somehow pressuring them. But I'm looking forward to kind of trying to understand that, much less what happened with the Veterans Bill, much less what has happened with Kirsten Sinema's vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, where she...
Let's talk about her.
Yeah, please. Well, just mention, if you can in your answer, what she did with the carried interest law, which is a loophole, a tax policy I've been following, Michael, for as long as I've been talking about tax policy with experts. I don't talk about it, I ask people to. But anyway, this carried interest rule has always been reprehensible. And an easy way to bring money into the country.
Right, and it's basically carried interest is a tax provision that benefits private equity firms and hedge fund managers, basically fabulously wealthy Americans. Her one big red line on the bill was that the bill would have closed the carried interest loophole. She demanded that it remain open so that these people could continue to get tax break. And then today she voted on an amendment to lower the tax burden for private equity. You'll have to forgive me for not knowing the exact specifics, but basically it was a payoff to private equity managers. And, from a political perspective, what the fuck is she doing? I mean, forgive my language, but I am at a loss to understand how that is good politics, that she went out of her way to deliver a tax break to super wealthy people. You would think, Pete, that if you were a Democratic senator, just a senator in general, you would want the one thing that you do in this massive legislation to be politically beneficial to a large number of Americans, particularly ones who might cast a vote for you or against you maybe next in 2024 and show up for re-election. Instead, she delivered a tax break for super wealthy private equity and hedge fund employees. Or managers. It is an absolute amazing. And the thing about cinema is that this is like the conclusion of a 2-year process of completely sabotaging her political career. I mean, I would have said to you a couple years ago, Kirsten Sinema would be my dark horse pick as a potential presidential nominee of the Democratic Party. She's a woman. She's young. She's, she was seen as like relatively, progressive but not too progressive, sort of could find the sweet spot in Democratic Party politics from a really important state, Arizona, a swing state. Yeah, I can see it. She had she had a big personality. A lot of people know she is. She has a lot of attention to herself. Instead, she has done everything she can in the last 2 years to sabotage her career, mostly by just curb stomping Democrats, her own party.
The hedge for the carried interest law is always, how many people could possibly be benefiting from that? They have a lot of money. They're probably donating to her campaigns, but yes, how many of them can there be, and how cynical? It's just such a bad look. And more specifically, my understanding is it's, you have to pay 15% on the returns that your client's money makes. I mean, that's what a hedge fund is. Like, you're managing money, and when it makes money, you got to pay 15%, which is not the normal corporate rate.
No.
And it's not the normal capital gains rate. And it's not labor. That's the thing that irks the shit out of me. I remember, talk to right-wing, hard-working, I don't know, guys that work manual labor, whatever, and say, these guys that do nothing, they're doing nothing really but moving money, are paying less as a percentage of what their money is making than you on your actual hourly labor, which is like twice what you're paying twice what they're paying. Is that fair? I just don't understand how Democrats don't message that, or maybe they do, and hit her over the head with it, or Republicans too on it.
So let me go one more point. So some people have argued that she is doing this because it means campaign contributions from private equity firms.
Does it, though? I mean, you can look at that stuff up. I don't know.
No, it does. She has raised a lot of money from them. Okay. Her fellow Arizona Democrat, Mark Kelly, is up for re-election this year. Guess how much money he's raised for re-election? Take a wild guess, Pete.
I have no idea. $2 million.
Please. $52 million he's raised so far.
Jesus. For a Senate, I used to think the number was like $10 million to run a Senate, but I'm sure that's all changed and depends on the cycle.
Million.
Wow. That's more than enough.
He didn't have to kiss the ass of private equity managers to raise that money. He just was a good, loyal, progressive Democrat from Arizona, went out and raised $52 million. I'm sure he raised it from a lot of rich people, no doubt about it. My point is that Sinema did not, if the issue here is raising money, there are so many ways to raise money in modern American politics, right? There's lots of ways to do it and do it effectively. I mean, for Christ's sake, what's her name? McGrath in Georgia, Amy McGrath, she raised like $50 million and she lost by 20 points to Mitch McConnell. I mean, you can,
if
you're in Kentucky, in Kentucky, thank you. If you're a Democrat in a tough race, you can raise a lot of money. Guess who's not going to raise a lot of money from, small donors like Mark Kelly, other have done? Kirsten Sinema.
Yeah.
Why? Because she's going to get fucking primaried by a Democrat, a liberal Democrat, because she's pissed off Democrats so much. And you know what? She might lose. I think she will lose, actually. That's how much she's damaged herself. And even if she doesn't lose, she's needlessly brought on a very difficult primary fight against the progressive Democrat. For what? For payoffs from private equity and hedge fund managers? It's befuddling.
It's really hard
makes no sense
to analyze it. And she doesn't really give interviews. And even those who cover her have, as you're saying, their best guess as to why she's making. It leaves us to speculate and spin. And who knows? I think the most interesting speculation was what you just said. She could get a primary opponent, and I don't know what that means for winning that seat for a Democrat if it's a more progressive Democrat in Arizona. And
I'll go one step further. By the way, she also, if you remember, last year or beginning of this year, she voted against doing away with the filibuster on voting rights legislation. Remember, there was this whole thing about suspending the filibuster.
Yep,
she and Manchin proposed it. Guess who will never vote for her if she ever ran for president one day? Black people, because she voted against changing voting rights legislation, which is an issue of critical importance to Black Americans. Why? Because Republicans keep passing laws to infringe upon the rights of Black voters. So she screwed herself. She's going to get a primary challenge in Arizona. As far as her national aspirations, she can forget about those. Because she's never going to win over Black voters in primaries because of the voting rights issue. Because anyone running against her will bring that up. She has screwed herself politically, and she did it all to herself. No one else did it to her. She did it to herself.
In your latest post, which covers a lot, I love your most recent post, which wasn't titled well. It just said checking in.
Because I was on vacation.
I know, but it was like, I thought you were just like, hey, everybody, it was just going to be like a housekeeping note. Yet it was like announcing.
But I had the picture of Jack Nicholson coming through the bathroom door from The Shining.
Yeah, I know.
That was pretty good, though.
Really freaked me out. But it's a post that covers a lot, including your reaction, your take. And it's been really interesting to see, I guess it was over the weekend, maybe, everybody react to Dick Cheney's ad for his daughter, Liz. And you wrote about this under a title, Now I Care. And, you're pointing to Dick Cheney only caring about things when they affect him directly, which is exactly something my dad said over the weekend, my dad hates Dick Cheney so much. And
good for your dad.
Yeah, and so do a lot of people, obviously. But what are your thoughts on this ad that he made, this video he made, really, in support, obviously, of his daughter, but very critical of Donald Trump's election lies?
So let's see. Donald Trump announced his candidacy for president in 2015, right? The famous ride down the escalator.
That's right. Yeah.
As you may remember, I think it was like days later, attacked John McCain's patriotism, right? Said, I like POWs who weren't captured, weren't POWs. So at any point from that escalator ride in 2015 to last week, Dick Cheney could have come out, he's a former vice president, twice elected, could have come out and basically said, attacked Donald Trump, could have criticized him. Any number of issues he could have criticized him about. January 6th, that's been, I think a year and a half since then, because nothing, crickets, not a word. Now, when his daughter is about to lose her re-election fight, unfortunately, I will add, because I think Liz Cheney actually is a pretty heroic figure, unlike her father. Now he speaks out. Now he decides, I'm going to say something bad against Trump. And people are praising him for it. And because in part he called Trump a coward. Here's the reality. Dick Cheney is 1,000 times more of a coward than Donald Trump.
Wow.
Yeah. Because Dick Cheney at any point, if he truly cared about democracy, truly cared about the Republican Party, truly cared about the direction of the country, he could have spoken out against Donald Trump. And he did not. He could have endorsed Joe Biden in 2020. He could have endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016. Every Republican could have done that. None of them did. George Bush, same thing. Hasn't said a word. He said euphemistically been critical of Trump, never directly critical of Trump. And as far as I'm concerned, people like Cheney and W are as responsible for Trump as anybody else.
How so?
Because they remain silent.
Right.
They have refused to say to their own party, this person is someone we should not be supporting. This is not somebody that we should be vilifying. This is somebody that we should be rallying around. And, it's the same thing over and over again with these Republicans where they are just so unwilling to criticize their own. And I don't know if you saw this. I mean, I've written a lot about, or on Twitter at least, about the whole thing in Michigan with Democrats supporting this primary candidate running against Peter Meyer, who was a Trump MAGA election denying.
Peter Meyer is a Republican congressman who voted to impeach the president,
yes.
Right? And then so Democrats in Michigan supported his candidate, who's a MAGA guy, a Trump guy, a supporter. And this is this technique, that a lot of people have been saying is very controversial. And you have a lot to say about that. You tweeted a great thread by Josh Marshall. I totally agree with you guys. But what do you want to say about Peter Meyer in Michigan?
Well, so Meyer, who basically, just absolutely withering attack against Democrats for supporting his opponent, the day after he loses to his, MAGA-loving, election-denying opponent, goes to a unity event with him where he introduces him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Now, he made a big point saying, I don't endorse him, which to me is like, one, have your cake and eat it too. You don't appear at a unity event with the guy who you say is a threat to democracy, because most voters will see that correctly as an endorsement, even if you have an action, I'm endorsing him. So, the hypocrisy of it. But the better one is in Arizona, where Doug Ducey, who is the governor, he's term limited, so can't run again. He has been withering in his criticism of Carrie Lake, who is the now Republican nominee for governor in Arizona. She has She's a full-on 2020 election denier. She has said that if she had been governor, if she had been in Ducey's place, she would not have certified the election.
Right.
She has called for an end to all electronic voting machine voting. All should be done counted by hand. He basically said 3 weeks ago that she's a liar and that she's lying to voters. Guess what he did yesterday, Pete?
Yeah, I saw your tweet. Came out and
he endorsed Carrie Lake for governor. God forbid. I mean, just like Dick Cheney, cannot. It's like literally there's nothing worse than ever, criticizing a fellow Republican, or God forbid, saying that that you would support a Democrat over a Republican. Like, that's what Doug Ducey should be saying. He should be saying, I'm a Republican. I believe the Republican Party. I don't vote for Democrats. But in this situation, Carrie Lake is lying. She lied about, what I did in 2020 election. And you should be voting for her. No. Instead, he endorses her. And I just think this is a huge part of the problem, is Republicans who just are unwilling to speak out against Trump. Yeah. Because I think they don't want to, there's no worse sin for them than to be supporting a Democrat. And so they won't do it. Now, I will say one thing. Larry Hogan in Maryland, I don't think he's endorsed a Democratic opponent, but he has basically refused to say anything positive about the Republican who won. He's the governor, two-term governor, also term limited, didn't run for election, a election denying, Trump loving Republican named Dan Cox, I think his name is. He won the Republican primary, and Hogan very clearly said, I'm not going to endorse this guy. He's a nut job. Good for him. Good for Larry Hogan. But he's the exception, not the rule.
I wanted to ask you, there's a lot more to talk about that strategy and whether or not it works and where it works and what it means. But I wanted to ask you about a couple other things real quick, one of which is the aftermath, the consequences of Roe v. Wade being overturned. It was just Indiana over the weekend that passed a bill. Basically, just to, I have to remind myself sometimes, the Supreme Court decided that states can now decide on their abortion rules. They could make it illegal. They could do all these crazy things. In any instance, go after anybody who helps the woman, chase them if they try to leave, turn the whole thing into Gilead. And there's this question now about what does it mean for those states' economies? What does it mean for those states' colleges, companies, multinationals? What does it mean if they are going to create this atmosphere? And by the way, one last thing, we're going to continue to see headlines, nightmarish headlines of young women who were raped, incest, of women who were going to die if they didn't get an abortion. These headlines are not going to stop. What do you think this means for colleges, companies, the economies of these states?
A couple weeks ago, I wrote speaking of bad truth and consequences headlines, I wrote a piece titled "Women Are Going to Die," which I realized in retrospect might have sounded like I was, issuing a threat of some sort. But of course, what I was referring to was
I got it the way you meant it. Yeah, I never thought.
I know you did. I'm glad you did. But I realized after I said it out, I'm like, if you got that in your inbox, you might be like, "What the hell's happening with Michael? Jesus, he's
no." I think you want people to read your thing. You write a somewhat provocative headline, but it's not really hyperbolic. It is a true statement. It's not even
right. So that's it. I wanted to pick up the point you just made. I think it's really important. We heard some of these stories already. I mean, I was just reading a story a couple days ago about a woman in Texas who 7 months pregnant, fetus died. She's being forced to carry the fetus to term, even though the fetus is dead, because my understanding is because potentially the doctors could be charged with crime or could be sued if we call it DNC, I believe what it's called, which is what you do after a miscarriage as far as to
remove the baby from the womb,
remove the fetus, any fetal tissue.
Fetus, yeah.
And so she has to carry. And so the other thing is also, I think it was maybe her case, a different case I read about women who are in situations where hospitals are saying you're not at enough risk of dying for us to act. Only if you get really, really sick and close to death, then we can actually intercede and do a certain abortion procedure. So from my perspective, it's only a matter of time before a woman dies because of these laws, because of these rules, because of these fears that doctors have about being prosecuted for conducting a medical procedure. And so, to your point, like I think we're going to keep seeing these stories between now and November, and I think it's going to only add to the anger that is out there about overturning Roe versus Wade. And so, you mentioned Kansas. I mean, look, what happened in Kansas is it's an earthquake. I don't know what it means.
Oh, I mentioned Indiana passing the law,
too.
but what about what about Kansas voting?
Well, the Kansas thing, I mean, you had basically a constitutional amendment to the Kansas Supreme Court a couple of years ago ruled that abortion was protected under the state constitution. So the anti-abortion folks were trying to push this amendment that would return the decision to the state legislature in Kansas, which is controlled by Republicans, would mean abortion bans. And that measure failed 60-40, basically. The pro-choice people won 60-40. That's a huge victory in a red state. And on an election that was basically, there were very few contested Democratic primaries on primary day in Kansas. Most of them were on the Republican side. So it was mostly a Republican electorate. But Democrats came out in huge numbers. And I don't know, I think it's too soon to say what this means, because it's one thing to vote, on a single issue like abortion. It's something else to then vote for a Democrat versus Republican in November. I mean, the Democratic governor in Kansas still may lose in November because Republicans might say, well, I agree with her on abortion,
right,
but I don't like her views on X, Y, and Z issues. But still, it's a red state. And it suggests that women are mobilized and they are angry about this decision, because certainly you saw that in Kansas. There's no question.
I would just say in a way that we've, been hoping to see. Easy for two guys to say that, and we should be out there with them. But I kind of thought there would be maybe more. Well, this is it in Kansas, because it's not like the anti-abortion people weren't organized. The Catholic Church, we found out, gave millions of dollars to the anti-abortion campaign. They were organized and well-funded, and they seemingly got thumped because of what you're saying, is that the outrage. This was their amendment, by the way. This was their amendment. This is when they pushed it for years, had pushed this. Yeah.
So this was, their impetus behind this. No, it's one data point. So it's hard to draw too much of a conclusion.
But it's Kansas.
It's Kansas, exactly.
Kansas. And pro-choice, pro-women, pro-equality. I don't know what even to say anymore. Groups, campaigns are gonna look exactly what Kansas did, and so are the anti-abortion group. Everybody's gonna analyze that campaign pretty deeply. But that's a lot of good news. And just going back, and I'll wrap it up with you, Michael. I mean, I love this tweet that you had about the importance of the Georgia runoff elections, the importance of Ossoff and Warnock winning in Georgia. I would go as far as saying the importance of a whole bunch of black folks, specifically black women who were organized, Stacey Abrams and that whole operation down there that helped those two senators. And now I can't find the tweet, but you're basically saying that vote saved the planet, which I've been saying and thinking. I think that's the only way I think. I start there. And I think it's such an important point to make. So just a little bit more about, that existential threat and what that.
But I want to pick up one thing, if you don't mind, on one thing you just said, I think is really interesting. You credited what happened in Georgia to black voters. And there's no question that was a big part of what happened.
It's my understanding. Yeah.
It's actually, if you look at the numbers in Georgia, what really mattered, and this is something that we saw across the board in 2020. There were Joe Biden did worse among black voters than Hillary Clinton did. The margins were narrower than
in Georgia or overall?
Clinton. Overall, in Georgia, in Michigan, in a lot of states. The difference was that Biden did exceptionally well in the suburbs around Atlanta, around Detroit, around Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He did really well among white suburban voters, especially white female suburban voters. And I bring this up, I'm not trying to.
You want to take this triumph from black women and give it to white women. It sounds like that's what I'm hearing, and I'm also hearing the groans of so many black female listeners and others. So if you could address the groans,
let me just address that by saying that black women are the most loyal, I guess, lack of a better term, constituency in the Democratic Party. A lot of the drop off was among black men, actually, and you saw that in 2016 as well.
On the Georgia runoff?
No, and the
general election. Okay,
thinner margins that Biden won black voters by in 2020 were more because of black men than black women.
Okay,
so which makes the larger point that men are the worst, and we know you and I are men. We know this already. This is not a big surprise to us.
Yeah,
but
we're activated by the weirdest things to vote, though. What activates a voter is an interesting thing, but a woman versus a man, and what scares us.
I mean, we're just we're the weaker sex. No, don't worry about it. But my larger point is this: I'm not trying to disrupt black voters here. What I'm saying is that what played a huge role in Democratic success in 2018 and 2020 was suburban women voters, and you could argue that what you saw in Kansas somewhat was an outgrowth of that improvement that Democrats are having among suburban women voters. And I suspect that if you see a huge Democratic, performance on Election Day in November in the midterms, it'll come not because of black voters, because black voters are always loyal and dependable to the Democratic Party. That's sort of a given. I think what will be different is that you will have this increase in women voters, suburban women especially, coming out in big numbers Democrats. Again, I can't emphasize this point enough. 2018 and 2020, they were crucial for Democrats.
Yeah.
And I think the abortion decision, could only increase their prominence and their importance.
It's such an easy, terrifying, real, authentic message for Democrats to be sending to every woman and those who care about their reproductive rights and general equality.
And look, Republicans are going to want to say it's all about the economy, and I think economy is important. I'm not to minimize it, but at the end of the day, I mean, I think if you say to women, are you going to vote on the economy for this, this cycle, or long-term reproductive rights for both yourself and your daughters? That's a strong message for Democrats. That's a strong pushback on Republicans talking about the economy. That this is about something larger than just this happening right now. It's about the long-term future of women in American society. And I've said this to you before on the show, but if you're a woman in a red state right now, you're a second-class citizen. You do not have equal rights to men,
or in the Catholic Church. So, but enough about my Catholic friends.
Yeah, please.
I know you really are super supportive, apparently, of suburban white women, and I'm thinking you might want to change your newsletter to Truth and Karen Quences. Truth and Karen Quences.
Wait a minute, but our Karens are not. Well, maybe they are. Maybe Karens are women who are actually now upset about the abortion decision. I don't know. I was talking to a friend of mine in Kansas, and he said, "Look, a lot of women in Kansas, probably for years, voted for Republicans, thinking this wasn't going to affect, on abortion, and voted, sort of on the anti-abortion message because they think it would affect them personally, and now it does, and now they feel differently, and I think that maybe have a huge impact.
Well, we'll see if it does. We'll see if it affects them directly, or if they have the resources to get their, themselves and their daughters whatever they need, and it's poor people or it's other people who are going to see these penalties. But you would think that even if it doesn't affect them directly, they're going to hear the same stories that we're going to hear about 10 and 11 and 12-year-old girls being raped and being forced to carry the child, or any other number of horrible stories. They're going to hear them. I don't know what it's going to do to their vote or engagement in any way, but I mean, we're just going to continue to hear these nightmarish stories.
And if you're the Democratic Party, especially after Kansas, this is all you're talking about between now and November. This is all. First of all, I think you're talking about insulin prices. I think you're talking about the fact that Republicans, basically stopped you from paying less, diabetics paying less for insulin. But I think you talk about this issue. This is the places like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona. Literally, Georgia, whose governor affects whether there's abortion, access to abortion in those states or not.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So the gubernatorial races, you mean? You can run right on that. I mean, absolutely. And they're going.
And they already are.
And they're going to have to answer. They're going to have to answer the question, sir. Do you think a child, should have to carry? They're going to have to answer these questions. These really hard questions.
And let me just say one more thing. I know we have to do something, but I'll say one more thing about Indiana because you brought it up, and I think it's important. In Indiana, it's probably not going to affect the elections in Indiana. I don't think there's any state. Maybe the Senate, maybe the senator. I think Todd Young might be up for. I'm not sure, but I don't think it's going to affect a huge effect politically in that state. Where I think it matters is that you've already seen some Republicans trying to back away from these extremist positions on abortion. Doug Mastriano, who's in Pennsylvania running for governor, has sort of stopped talking about abortion, even though it was number one issue 2 months ago. Now he won't talk about it. The thing with Indiana is that it says it kind of says they may not want to talk about it now, but this is the future that you're looking at. You're looking at a future where if you've got a Republican-controlled legislature and a Republican governor, this is the kind of law that's going to get passed in your state. Yeah. And so even they don't want to talk about it. I think Indiana is, because this happened, don't forget, this is the first law passed after Dobbs, after Roe was overturned. And I think it's very bad for Republicans. It's very bad for women, first and foremost. That's the most important thing. But it's bad for Republicans in the sense that this kind of shows where this is going to go in other places where Republicans get full control.
Yeah. Boy, the pain that so many families are going to have to go through, though, is
it's horrific. It's horrific. I mean, whatever my own personal feelings about abortion, it's irrelevant. This is a human rights issue, and you're subjecting women to just extraordinary, needless pain and potentially tragedy. It breaks my heart, and to see what they passed in Indiana, to see with such minimal exceptions.
Do you talk to anybody on any kind of regular basis, or I don't think you've left the country anytime recently, because this issue and the gun violence issue are, I mean, they can't believe what's happening in Europe and Latin America, even where, they're more progressive on abortion. In Mexico, just made abortion legal just recently.
Yeah. I'll say this to you. My sister-in-law had for a long time, she's not wanted to come to America and not wanted to live here. They live overseas because of the gun laws in America.
They're worried about being.
She's 100% worried
victims of gun violence.
Yes.
So was my friend. I keep saying this on the podcast. I mean, I think it's irrational, but
is it? If you watch the news, does it seem irrational?
I think that you live your life with a certain set of trade-offs, and I think that flying in a metal tube across over the Atlantic Ocean is pretty scary. The odds that you're going to be shot at your tourist resort, they're low. And so do you not leave your house anymore? I mean, I think it's irrational, but it's affecting people wanting to come here for sure.
But isn't that kind of how terrorism works? I mean, this isn't organized terrorism, but it creates terrorism. It creates things of fear. And I look, you're right. Of course it's irrational. You're right. Based on numbers, it's totally irrational. But if this could happen in every community in America, in every state, in schools, in businesses, you name it. And so I get it. If you see this stuff from afar, you think America's the Wild West. And look, when I travel in America, I travel in America outside of New York, in states where gun laws are looser. I think about it. It's certainly a thought crosses my mind. What would I do if this became a you're right. It's totally irrational.
I'm just less lippy in those states. Like if a guy cuts me off in Florida, where you can have a bazooka, open carry bazooka, I'm probably less likely to be like, hey, buddy, watch where you're going.
In fairness, Pete, that's your own fault for going to Florida. I mean,
you're not wrong about that. I'm just saying. I'm just using it as no, you're not wrong. But it's a risk we're taking. I'm just saying I'm less lippy there. Imagine being conscious of where you're at in terms of whether or not you're going to push back in a road rage moment.
I wouldn't. I'm Lippy is kind of my middle name, so I don't even know what it would be very difficult for me not to be Lippy in that situation. But you're right. Now that I think about it, if I was in Texas, I might be a little less Lippy.
Yeah, I think that's probably a slogan. I'm going to put that in my meditation. Less Lippy. Michael, thank you as always. I appreciate it. So good.
That was a lot of fun, Pete, as always. Thanks.
Yeah, there he goes, Michael Cohen, everybody. At SpeechBoy71. Go subscribe to his Substack and read his posts. Always great. Love getting them in my inbox, and you will too. Truth and Consequences is the name of his Substack. Go look it up. Links to it in today's show notes, as always. Coming up, I've got the first female prosecutor from Loudoun County, Virginia, who comes highly recommended. We had a great conversation. I learned a lot from her. She is a really interesting, tough, smart, compassionate person, and you're going to love my conversation with Buta Biberaj. But first, I do have to tell you about how much I love doing this podcast. I cannot thank you enough for supporting it. This podcast is my own small business. And you know what, folks? Your business is your dream. Do you have one? Do you work at one? You want the people who share it, that dream, and have the skills to help it grow. So if you want to find them faster, you should do it with Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Find great talent faster through time-saving skills tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. With Indeed's Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Imagine that. Listeners have loved using Indeed.com to find the people that help make their business, their dream, that much better. It makes all the hiring all in one place so easy. Indeed's the only job site where you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. Indeed is an unbelievably powerful hiring partner, delivering 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. You know what? By the way, in the minute I've been talking to you, 16 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data. And if you use Indeed in the U.S., you're 3 times more likely to get a hire, according to Indeed data. So start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/standup. The offer is only good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit right now at Indeed.com/standup. Indeed.com/standup. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire. You need Indeed. All right. Well, I am so happy to share my conversation with Buta Biberaj. She comes highly recommended by Qasim Rashid. She's what we call a progressive prosecutor. She was elected to serve Loudoun County, Virginia as the Commonwealth's attorney. She's admitted to practice law in Virginia, New York, Maryland. She grew up, by the way, in the Bronx. You can hear it in her voice. She's the first elected female of Loudoun County's Commonwealth's chief prosecutor. She was born in Montenegro, and her parents are Albanian, and just a really interesting life story, raised in the Bronx, as she mentions. But she talks about the challenges and the obstacles to being a prosecutor, to being a progressive prosecutor in Virginia, and you might be surprised about her biggest concern. I think you're going to really like my conversation with her. I hope that you'll follow her on Twitter. Let her know that you heard her here on the show. That'll be huge. She's got a small following that I'd like to make a big following. Buta Biberaj. Buta Biberaj. Look for it in today's show notes. Here we go for the first time ever. The Madam Commonwealth's of Virginia attorney for Loudoun County. Buta Biberaj. How did I do? Is that the correct pronunciation?
You did great, Pete. Thank you.
It's a wonderful name for a wonderful person. I'm super impressed with what you've been able to accomplish in Virginia and in your life. And I like to introduce people a little bit to my audience in terms of who they are and kind of where they grew up. So if you don't mind, I just like to talk about what led you to the legal world, first and foremost. And you know, also, I know that your family's from Montenegro and you came here when you were 2 and you grew up in the Bronx. I mean, what a fascinating journey that you have been on. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, excellent. Thank you for the question. So, as I indicated to you, I came when I was 2.5. My parents are Albanian. 7 out of 8 children were born in Montenegro. The last one was born in New York. So we're a very large family. The opportunity to grow up in New York City is one that I don't think many people appreciate until they leave New York, because of all the diversity and the fact that you don't realize there's diversity because everybody's just different.
Right.
So
Right.
we, growing up there, we had an opportunity to always be in communities where they were very diverse, but we were always very included. So you didn't really see the difference. And I tell people I didn't see my color because of the fact that the communities that we were in were so receptive and so inclusive. And then leaving there and coming down to Virginia is a very different experience. But I'm going to answer your question about how I became a lawyer, why I chose to do that. There was a TV show called LA Law.
Yeah.
And you might... So that was a private practice law firm. And what they would end up doing is they were working on just different types of cases. But there was one attorney specifically by the last name of Cifuentes. And he would always have the criminal cases, and his clients were always innocent. And he always found a way to be able to prove their innocence. And I couldn't think of a greater superhero than somebody who's a champion for the people. That intrigued me and made me want to be a lawyer.
Well,
that's kind of really good.
Where does that quality or idea come from? Is that something from your family, something from culture, something from growing up in New York? Is it sometimes a TV show really does change the way you think, or even a book.
It really, I think it may center you or focus you, right? But for those characteristics, I think I saw that in my family growing up. My parents, as we are immigrants. They are from Albania. And the culture, it literally is what you can do for someone else, you should or you must. And it's also part of the Muslim faith, right? Grace to others. And then growing up in New York, I think New York is also the same thing. I mean, New Yorkers have this attitude or this perception that they're cold. No, we're just not overly friendly if we don't know you. But to the end of the day, we would literally take the shirt off our backs and give it to somebody else if it will help them.
Yeah.
So I think it's that combination of all those mixed experiences.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're a real mix of a lot of different things. Growing up in the Bronx alone. I mean, I can hear it in your accent. It's wonderful. How did you get to Virginia, George Mason?
My parents had retired down here. I was initially attending Fordham University. And, we talk about you can take the kid out of the city. We can't take the city out of the kid. Mm-hmm. So I knew that was going to be a situation where I had transitioned to college. And you come from high school where they monitor and supervise you pretty well, consistent. You get to college, they give you this piece of paper called a syllabus, which I didn't know what the heck that meant. But you have a midterm and you have a final. And being a procrastinator at that age of my life, I was like, I could study later. And then when it comes time for midterms and finals, it's 5 books per class. And you realize I'm not that daggone genius. So that didn't work so well. So
well, you're pretty.
I needed to find the transition.
You strike me as a highly intelligent human being, probably like a traditionally intellectual student type of person. But who were you in high school? Who was Buta Biberaj in high school?
Actually, high school was a great thing for me because it allowed me to be in a setting where obviously we learned, but you have a captive audience. So being kind of like a class clown or pain in the neck to the teachers, that was me. Me too. I like to say I never missed one. I literally had perfect attendance in high school because I wasn't a good student. I was maybe a C student. I wasn't good at learning in that setting, sitting in a classroom. I was drawing pictures and mainly I was getting laughs. Every day was an audience, so I never missed a day. So we have that in common, and comedians and lawyers apparently have a similar skill set. But I mean, at what point did you decide to go to law school? I always wanted to go to law school, so that part was kind of in the back of my mind. But while going to college, you think, wow, with college, I've got 16 years. 1, can I afford to go any longer? And 2, can I really stand to go any longer? So I ended up getting a teaching degree, and I taught 3 years elementary school. And at that point, I really enjoyed teaching. And I kept thinking, if I don't leave now, I actually will miss my window because I will stay as a teacher. And it's not anything negative. It would be like the perfect spot. But I always did want to make sure that I pursued the law. Oh, wow. I didn't realize that in my research. I did not realize that you spent 3 years as a teacher. But that makes you that much more impressive. You are now how do I say this? The Madam Commonwealth's attorney for Loudoun County, Virginia. You were also the first woman, I think, elected to this position. And it's interesting because you also identify as being a progressive prosecutor. As a progressive myself, I've always thought prosecutors were the problem
and the enemy, and I sided with public defenders. So how did you get to this point in your life? Tell me a little bit about the journey, and then we could talk about the job.
So when I came out of law school, I owned practice up with a fellow graduate from law school, and we did a general practice firm. I did predominantly criminal defense, personal injury, business consultation, and all those things. And I saw the system, how it worked, and it was always related anecdotally to what my clients were experiencing. You would see certain things, but really it just became the experience without you understanding it. After about 15 years, I was given the opportunity to be a substitute judge. And then I started seeing it directly because I would have cases come before me that the prosecutors presented, and they would have similar fact patterns, but they were being disposed of or resolved differently. And I was thinking, wait a second, this is not my theory or my thought as to what happened. I'm actually seeing it.
Right.
So if I'm seeing it, this is very clearly evident. And I remember having cases thereafter, because being a substitute judge is just on call. And I would have cases that I would bring to the prosecutor, say, hey, I'm looking to do this for my client. And they'd be like, yeah, no, I can't do that. I'm like, no, yes, you can, because you did it last week when I was on the bench with such and such case. And I realized they were very selective in how they handled the matters, and they would hide behind the I can't. And I was like, yeah, no, you can, but you're choosing to do differently. There was a case in the community that they had where this guy stole tires from 6 cars. And when he stole these tires, what he was doing is he was selling them to feed his drug addiction. The prosecutor hit him with 18 felonies, Ooh. 6 for the tires, 6 for stealing tires to sell, and then 6 for the destruction of property. They take it before a jury, and the facts are there, so it's not a made-up charge. The jury finds him guilty of 18 felonies. Then the prosecutor shows the rap sheet of the person who was at trial, and you see drugs, theft, right? There's a pattern. The argument that the prosecutor makes to the jury is, if you don't stop him, he's going to keep doing this. He's going to keep stealing and doing drugs and stealing and doing drugs. Right. Jury comes back and makes a recommendation of 127 years. So you have, then you're like 127 years. Well, in Virginia, we have what they call sentencing guidelines. And those are just recommendations to the judge. This guy's guidelines said that an appropriate disposition would be 2 to 4 years. The judge doesn't sentence him to 2 to 4 years. The judge sentences him to 17 active years. And when you look at it, so that's horrible, because what you've done is you've thrown away a person, but you haven't solved the problem. But I also looked at it from a community perspective. To keep somebody locked up in Virginia at the Department of Corrections is $25,000 a year. For 17 years, you just took $425,000 from our community to do what? You haven't made us any safer, but you've depleted our resources. Those are monies that can't go to the schools. It's not going to go to counselors. It's not going to go to drug programs. So what are we really doing? And that's when I realized we can't really allow this to continue, because you're not helping the community. You're creating a greater harm. And that made me want to look into much more specifically replacing or changing the culture in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. And I actually initially started with just hoping to find somebody who would run, because I was not interested in running. I had a great practice, very comfortable life, all things going well. And I was like, let's see if we can find somebody else that I can support. No one else really came to the forefront. And then I finally realized, you know what, I am comfortable, but my community is not comfortable. So that's when I chose to run. Oh, wow.
That's maybe interesting to unpack that realization, what brought you there. But I want to stick with my scripted question, which is, you're in a man's world. You always have been, it would seem. Tell me how you've been able to exist, much less seemingly thrive, in a world dominated by assholes.
Well, I won't speak to the a-hole part, but I'll speak to the general question. You know, isn't that a woman's struggle always anyway? Right? We're put in situations where traditionally we have the greatest responsibility but the least amount of power. So times are changing a little bit, where what we're able to do now is maybe come to the table and sit at the table rather than just serve the people at the table.
Do you feel like your journey as a woman now prosecutor, I mean, when you graduated in, I think, 93, you said there was, several women, but it was still not certainly the majority. And is it true that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, what did she give the commencement at your graduation?
Yes, she did. It was right before she was sworn as a Supreme Court justice.
And was she a role model for you?
She was, and she became more of one later in my life when I became smarter and more mature.
How so?
Because I think when you're younger, you don't see the disparities. You kind of just go with the flow. And then as you get older and you see more, you start also listening more. And she was somebody who was very, like, she was small in stature, but her presence was one that was an amazingly large figure. But she didn't do it with yelling and screaming. She basically very much had it as a conversation. And she drew you into her intellect and her rationale. And I think that was a great way to do it. And also, she was literally somebody who was a champion for the people. So that's always a great role model to have.
Well, tell me a little bit about, that's all amazing. Tell me a little bit about what your job entails on a kind of day-to-day basis. And then we can get to some of the really important and big issues that I know you're concerned on and working on. What do you do? So
the day can start at about 7 o'clock in the morning. It can end about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning the next night. There's just the office is very under-resourced. And also what we've done as progressive prosecutors is we've changed how we prosecute cases, because our attorneys are charged with actually knowing the facts of the case, not just reading a 1.5-page police report. They're charged with speaking with the victims. They're charged with speaking to the investigators. They're charged with speaking with witnesses so that we have a better understanding. And then the first thing we do is, can we make the case? And then it becomes, should we? So those are things that constantly throughout the day, either I'm dealing with administrative issues, HR issues for the running of the office, and then also case management, trying to make sure that we have the right people in the right courtrooms. So let's just say it's not a slow day at any point.
I can't even imagine. I was just in traffic court, and that prosecutor was just going non-stop. And by the way, I tried to kind of like cozy up to him. I had a stop sign. I rolled through a stop sign, and I kind of was like, when I finally he called my name, I just said to him, I go, boy, I'm really just fascinated watching you work. He's like, yeah. So here's the deal. Anyway, so. What does it mean to be a progressive prosecutor? What is that philosophy, and how do you identify it that way?
The way that we present it to our team members is trying to figure out how do we do justice in the community, right? Because everybody the old school prosecutors hides behind, we're here to protect the community. We're here to protect the victims. And the point becomes, our community includes everybody, right? It includes the victims. It includes the accused, the witnesses, law enforcement, the people down the street, the families that are involved. So there's a whole lot of players that we try to take into consideration. So as a progressive prosecutor, the mindset is really this: how do we solve problems? So like the guy who was stealing the tires. Why are you stealing tires? Because we know right off the bat, he doesn't need 24 daggone tires. So what are you really doing it for? Well, it's a drug addiction. So we could address the behavior, never solve the problem. Or we could address what brought him there and maybe solve the problem so the recidivism doesn't keep continuing, right? We're not locking people up, but not solving the problem. If I thought I could lock somebody up and they would never repeat a crime again, I might default to jail. Be like, that's a great answer. But we know that never happens, right? Because when you lock somebody up, they're not able to maintain their jobs. Without a job, you can't maintain housing. Your family doesn't have that benefit. If you're not in the home, what are you doing to your family? What are you doing to those kids who no longer have a parent in the home? And what are you doing to your community because you're no longer invested in your community because you feel like your community does not invest in you? Right. So you lose all of that stability, and that's what the problem is. It becomes a constant turnstile. They're just in and out, in and out.
It sounds like progressive prosecutor also could be defined as someone who thinks of crime in this case as very nuanced and wants to get the root of what causes the crime versus a more conservative prosecutor who thinks spanking works to control your children's behavior.
I think it's a matter of, in addition to the spanking controls the behavior, the thought process is that with that type of response, nobody ever questions you what you did, right? Because, I consequence, what more do you want me to do? So it's like almost kind of a cop-out. When you're not changing behavior, then you have to know you have to change how you're addressing it. I don't know if you have kids, but if you have multiple kids in a household, you treat them differently. Not that you're unfair, But with one of them, you could give them the eye. The other one, you could give them the daddy voice. The other one, you might have to give them the daddy hand. But they will respond differently. If you use the hand with every one of them, what you may do is you may end up breaking them so that they're not successful versus making them compliant. That's the challenge that we have as a system.
I mean, it's hard because you had to run for this office. You have to run a campaign. You have to sell an idea, and ideology in Loudoun County, Virginia, or upstate New York, or wherever we're talking about is different. But you've got to sell an ideology about, what you think is going to work best for your community. How have you been able to do that? This seems like a kind of, we've heard about Loudoun County because of the whole Board of Education situation that was covered by, who was it, a podcast or New York Times? But that happened in my town. It's happening everywhere. But how do you do that? How do you message and win an election and then stay in favor of voters, which is kind of a bad situation anyway that you have to run for election?
The challenge that we have is obviously communicating in real time to the community because you're doing the job. You don't have the opportunity to be able to say, hey, look at me. I did a great job today. Thank you. But you are constantly harangued by others who are saying you haven't done a good job. You haven't done a good job. So you have to make sure that those who are screaming inaccuracies somehow or another are balanced. The ideology was something that I would suggest to you that it was not about Buta, but it was about the timing. I thought that I was a very lonely voice when I was saying, as a prosecutor, the power is in the prosecutor that they could do so much good because they could expand how they treat these things. And I did not know that there were other prosecutors nationally who were thinking it is time that we do things differently. So the more I did research, the more I learned. I was like, wait a second, I'm not this genius or this novel theory person. It really is a common sense approach. And there are other people out there. So that really was the messaging to my community. Let's talk about, are we investing in our community or divesting? Are we keeping people safe or are we just locking people up? So again, let's look at PR because nothing is a dichotomy, right? You don't pick either or. There's a lot of fluidity in the middle as to how decisions are made and where it comes into place. So that really was trying to have conversations and saying, what do you need? Because everybody thinks if you commit the crime, you should do time. Not everything is worth time, but you have to have those slower conversations to speak to that.
Yes, so well said, but so hard to communicate, as I'm sure you know more than anybody because you're out there doing it. In the end, the public's interest is to bring crime down. I mean, in the end, if there's one thing that people are most concerned about, I suppose, in any community, it's about crime. We'd like less of it. You've had success so far. And I wonder if that's the only thing that matters. I don't know how you message it. That's a whole other thing, as you just mentioned. But talk to me about what you think the root of the problem is and how you've had success there.
I will not claim the success belongs to me or my office or our philosophies. It belongs to our community. That means we as a community are doing better. That's where really the strength of it is because if we're able to provide security and stability, then people have less of a need to do certain things. That's where the strength comes in, is if you have a stable housing community, a stable employment community, stable education community, that is going to inure to the benefit of the community. In Loudoun County, we have been very fortunate. Within the last 2 years, crime has dropped in double digits here in Loudoun County. And in some places, Virginia's gone up. In some places, nationally, it's gone up. But this is something which you have to look at is, again, what is going up and why, and how does that represent what the interests or the concerns of the community are. Progressive prosecutors get attacked if there's an uptick in crime. And it doesn't matter if they have 20 categories and there's an uptick in one, we're at fault. But we never get credit for the other 19. So what we have to be able to do is just to have those conversations and say, how can we better serve our community? Because we also all live in our community. So when we're trying to do these progressive things, I'm not about allowing violent people out in the community because guess what? I have to open my door and go to my community. I'm not going to put myself or my family or my friends at risk. So we're invested in the community. So we just hopeful people will actually see the good that we're doing and help us do better if there are things that we can improve on.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for them to see because you've got your critics constantly running all kinds of commentary and ads about, as you just said, that one category and trying to blame you for it somehow. Oh, there's a soft on crime and tough on crime ideology that is so prehistoric. But, before we started talking, you told me that of all the issues that you think are most, disconcerting or most important to discuss, that your concern really has to do with democracy, which of all the issues that you're dealing with in Loudoun County, I guess I was surprised to hear you say that. What exactly are you most concerned with there?
I think if anyone is paying attention, we have a domestic attack as well as a foreign attack on our democracy. When you think about what we as America stand for, it always has been the process of elections. People being able to vote, votes being counted, votes being able to determine who represents the people. And right now, what we've seen for the last 5 or 6 years is the entire system is under attack. So that people actually are coming out of their mouths and saying, well, I don't know if I could trust the vote. I don't know if if it's a true and fair election. You're like, what? Like, how did we get here? But this is the undermining of those processes, because then what you end up doing is if people don't have faith in the process, why would they vote? We have this situation, we're seeing it nationally with recalls. In my community, we're very fortunate because we have a lot of polling stations. A lot of people have the means to get in a car and drive somewhere. People have ID because they drive, or they may need them for their jobs or something else like that. So all those things that a lot of other states are putting in place to try to stall or prevent somebody from voting, we may not have those similar experiences here in Loudoun. But what ends up happening is we are nationally trying to convince people to vote. And what do people say? Why should I vote? My one vote is not going to count. It is, because your one vote in an aggregate is not one vote. So if we allow the system to change, the people can't go and vote because they don't have an ID. That's great in cities and towns and state, in larger areas. But in the rural areas, guess what? They don't have a daggone ID because they don't need it.
Yeah.
So they may not be able to vote. And then we have polling stations that get decreased. So you now have to drive an hour and a half instead of 15 minutes, and you have to wait 5 hours in line instead of 30. And we can't even give you water online anymore. So here it is. So all these things get put in place. But even if somebody successfully then is able to drop their ballot and vote, the next time they say, well, we're not going to count it because I think you're really dead.
Yeah.
And then we go through that hurdle and they realize, no, you're alive. Well, we're not going to certify the vote. You're not going to do that. So you have to then recertify the vote, and the person gets chosen to represent the people. And then the next thing we say is, well, we're going to do a recall, so we're going to undo the election. If that happens, how do we ever convince anybody to vote?
Right.
Talk about disenfranchising large groups. So I think that's the biggest threat that we have to our democracy right now, is the fact that all these efforts are being done to thwart somebody from voting. It's unfortunate.
Are you seeing the consequences of those campaigns in your county? Are you seeing people turn away from, and lose trust in the system?
We're hearing that in conversations where you now have it as a regular conversation where somebody's talking about the votes were stolen. The election was stolen, that people are going to try to come and vote numerous times in our polling stations. So these things are gaining traction, unfortunately.
Well, listen, I know our connection's fading for something's happening, but I have loved this conversation, and I really appreciate you identifying a lot of the issues here and all of the work that you're doing. I'd love to talk to you again and more specifically about the everything that you're dealing with. Before I let you go, there's just one more question I want to make sure I ask you. I just remembered. I saw the press release there that your office put out about the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Your state specifically, when it comes to women's reproductive rights, what is the legal paradigm? What are your concerns for the women of your county?
The toughest challenge is that with these reversals in the law, what you've done is you've now made women's health care not an option. If you're talking about somebody can't get an abortion, and it's not as they promote that the fact this is an attempt to be able to control like a birth control effort. So, no, we're talking about healthcare when somebody is pregnant. If they have an ectopic pregnancy, they can't go to the doctor and get an abortion from a health perspective, is the fear that this is where it might go. You've got situations where individuals are going to be forced to possibly even get pregnant because we're not going to allow contraceptions in a relationship. I mean, this is the part that you have reduced the woman to being nothing more. I should say nothing more, to being mainly just a birth provider.
Yeah.
Right. So you sit there and you go, wait a second, this is not something that is appropriate. In Virginia, our governor is actually talking about changing the law as to how it relates to abortion. So that's the concern, is that right now we don't have it, but the conversation is already gaining traction amongst the Republican leaders that that's what they want to push for. And unfortunately, we don't have a Constitution that's protecting us.
Well, we will be supporting you here and around the country, and be also needing your insights and leadership on where we go. So I'm looking forward to talking to you again, and what an honor it has been to talk to you today, Buta. Really a pleasure to just be in your presence and to be able to throw these questions at you. Thank you so much for what you do, and thank you so much for joining me to talk about it.
Pete, I appreciate you and your time and the opportunity. So thank you, and I wish you the best.
All right, there you have it. Buta Biberaj, what did you think? Wasn't she awesome? Go say hello to her right now, please, on Twitter. That would mean a lot to me. Let her know that you heard her here on the program, and we'll get her back to analyze all the issues that we just talked about and much, much more. Interesting to see or hear what her biggest concern there was about, obviously, democracy. Everybody's thinking about it. Buta Biberaj on Twitter. Go follow her. If you're in Virginia, you can vote for her in Loudoun County, or you can donate to her campaign anywhere. So check it out and find more people like her to run and get elected in important positions like that. All right, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks again to Michael Cohen. Thank you to Buta Biberaj. Thank you for listening and subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, go do it. What are you doing? What are you waiting for? Let's go. Go on, standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominick right now. Let me know who you want to hear. Let me know what I can do better. Let me know if there are any errors in the show, because I host it, I edit it, I produce it, I book it, and I post it. So you can talk right to the top. It's me. Can't do it without you. So sign up now. John Carroll, singer, songwriter, Grammy Award winner. Would you mind taking us out as you do each and every day? And don't forget to try to be the change you want to see in the world, folks.
You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. And you can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up.